Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Lynn, and today I am super excited. I have another episode of Meet the Designer. And in this series of episodes, I like to sit down with a designer, paper crafter, card maker, and learn a little bit more about their crafty journey. And as well, in particular, their experience on design teams and their thoughts about that whole world, which can be a bit of a mystery to some folks who have never experienced it before. And so this is a bit of a evolution of my original Let's Talk Design Teams series. And on my channel, I do have a podcast all about design teams, and that's where you'll find this on replay. If you are joining live but can't stay for the whole thing, you'll find it in that podcast series. So I'm super excited because my guest today is Jay Thomas. He goes by Craft by Jay on all of the socials, and I am really excited to hear Jay's perspective on design teams because I know he is relatively, I say new to it, though he has been on teams for, we'll let him talk about it himself, but not super, super new. So he's still in that phase where I think he still remembers probably more clearly than I do what it's like to be new to this world of design teams. So that is what we are doing today. I am streaming to Jay's channel, my channel, and to Design Team 101 on Facebook. Although I see an error message where it can't connect to Facebook at the moment. So hopefully that works itself out. And if not, I will have to message everybody in Design Team 101 and let them know to pop on over to YouTube and join us here. I see some folks in the chat already. So Shauna, hi, my friend. Welcome. And T is here. Hi, T. Welcome, my friend. Stacy's here. Hello, Stacy. If you're joining live, welcome because I love and will welcome, and I'm sure Jay will welcome questions too. So please join in the conversation and ask questions. Always so happy to do these as real-time live streams so that we can really have that interaction and we can get to know Jay better together. So, and before we dive in and I actually bring Jay on, if everyone, whether you are here live or if you're catching this stream on replay, if you could hit that like button, that would be wonderful. And if you are here live and you are on all of the socials, could you also do me the favor of sharing this stream? Because quite possibly there's somebody in your social network who might enjoy being a part of this conversation. And if you share it now at the top of the stream, it's possible they can actually join in time to be here live with us and actually join in the conversation as well. Hi, Cordelia, welcome. And so if you could do those two things, that would be awesome. And I see Facebook still has not resolved itself. So I am going to bring my guest on today. And so, Jay, welcome, my friend. And
Hello.
hi, it's nice to, I'm glad you're on camera and we can put a face to a name and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've really liked the Let's Meet the Designer one with Delise where she was on camera. So I'm like, I could be on face cam, even though I almost never do it on my channel now. I feel like initially I did it quite a bit, but then I just kind of got away from it because it was sort of like, I don't know, I didn't feel like it added that much. But anyway, I'm mostly on YouTube as well as on Instagram at Craft by Jay in both places. And yeah, I think that's mostly, I guess that's sort of a brief intro into me. I came to crafting mostly as an adult. So, I mean, I think that makes it a little more interesting than I know some folks had been doing it like since forever, basically.
Awesome. I am just shooting out a quick message to Design Team 101. If you're not already a member, for those who are watching either live or on replay, um, part of why I started this series is because Danny and I started a Facebook group called Design Team 101 that was, again, an evolution of that original Let's Talk Design Teams series. And that group is all about just sort of helping each other as designers to learn how to get onto design teams, learn how to, be successful on design teams. And so I will put a link to that group in the comments on YouTube. And I'm going to shoot out a message because it doesn't seem like our stream is going out to Facebook. So hopefully they'll find us over here on YouTube. If you are
It is a
joining from
Monday
Jay's
after all.
if you're joining from Jay's channel, comment away because I can see comments both whether you're on my channel or on Jay's channel. So if you are on my channel, I do have a pinned comment in the live chat, and that's where you can find Jay's channel on YouTube. So I do hope that at some point everybody will find some time to pop on over to Jay's YouTube channel and check out his videos. And if you like what you see, maybe give him a little subscribe. Welcome. I see B's in the house. I think B meant Lynn, not Liv. Yep. I'm not sure why I called you Liv. No worries, my friend. Welcome. Okay, so thanks for telling us a little bit about yourself. I do have some questions planned, and I'm not, for anyone who is watching, Jay is not going to be ambushed by any of these questions. He was provided these questions in advance, so he won't be caught off guard by anything that I'll be asking today, except for any follow-up questions, because I'm sure we're going to have a really lovely conversation. So you never know what I will ask as a follow-up. And if you are joining live, I welcome you to ask follow-up questions too. So please do ask your questions. And I see Cynthia's here too. Welcome, my friend. Hi. Okay, so let us dive right into our you were starting to touch on this a little bit. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in paper crafting. I know you just mentioned that it sort of, you came to it as an adult.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my grandmother did a bunch of needlework, so like needlepoint and that kind of thing. So I mean,
Mhm.
I think I was introduced to crafting generally as a kid because we had done some of that together because she did a lot of makes that she do for like rummage sales and stuff like that to support charity. So I mean, I'd had that exposure, but I really hadn't done. And I think as a kid. Either my mom or dad had gotten me like a pop-up card book, like how to make pop-up cards yourself, and I played around with that a little bit as a kid, but I didn't do anything really in paper crafting until maybe probably about 2 or 3 years ago. About 5 years ago, some of the folks that I was watching on YouTube kind of had gotten into diamond painting, so I started looking at that, and like I liked the idea of it, but there were some elements of it that just weren't really my jam. Mostly like my vision is terrible, so it's like seeing all the little markers and doing it correctly was challenging. Um, Spoiler, if you want to get into that, like having a light board is a huge game changer. But
Okay,
anyway,
good to
so I
know.
had dabbled in that a little bit. And then um, I got into painting oddly, sort of as an offshoot of that. And like had a couple years of making like watercolor Christmas cards, and that was sort of around 2019. And then in I think about late 2019, early 2020, I started getting really into Spellbinders Club Kit videos for whatever reason. I think it was another one of those circuitous, like someone I was already watching had talked about them, and then oddly, somehow found Sager's channel and started watching a lot of that. I think it was mostly because like he was a guy crafting and I was a guy crafting, and it was just sort of like a normal like, oh, this is pretty cool thing. Um, but that's about when I really got into it, I think. And then yeah, I've been pretty much doing it consistently ever since, just because it's such a flexible hobby. I mean, you can either spend like 5 minutes on a card or you can spend like 5 hours on a card, and both of those things are encompassed within the hobby. So, like, sort of elements I like of other art forms, you can always pretty much pull into cards,
Yeah,
if that
that's
makes
true.
sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense because there are so many things that are like stitching being an example, right?
Hmm.
Now, we see a lot of stitching designs on in card making, and so things like that, things like gel prints are
Yeah.
making their way onto cards too. So I see what you mean that it's so inclusive in a sense of other art forms.
Yeah, I
So
mean, like all the mixed media stuff, it's like you have collage, you have like straight up painting too, if you want to do that. I mean, like you can do
yeah.
just can do a watercolor card, or I forget, someone did a really cool technique where they actually like, I think this was a craft roulette thing, but the person basically stamped in waterproof ink on muslin and then watercolored on that. So
Oh
there's like
wow.
some really arty things you can do, but I don't know. I tend to like I don't know. I tend to like I like die cutting and ink a lot, but I mean I've tended to stay more in the like card area, but I mean you can take it wherever you want.
Very, very true. We had some new folks joining, so welcome, Angela. Hello, my friend. Irene is here. Kendra is here.
Hi Kendra.
Hello. Yep.
Hey Angela.
Stamper Girl Delise says hi, Jay, and hi, Lynn. Hi, Delise. I hope you're feeling better. And Irene says, I'm the 5 hour variety, 4.5 of which is trying to figure out what to make. So true. I think part of my 4.5 hours is also deciding papers and color. That sort of takes me the longest. um, and T says that she loves mixed media. Yes, you are the mixed media queen, T. So wonderful. Awesome. Okay, so let's flip back to our questions, and now this is the same set of questions that I ask all designers with a few differences later on. So how, Jay, would you actually describe your style of either card making, paper crafting?
Kind of like you, I hate this question because I feel like when I got started, it was like, oh my God, I need to define a style. And I forget who I was talking to. I was talking to someone who was just very good in a specific style. Oh, I think it was probably Amanda. And it was sort of like, and she does a lot of light up cards, obviously, but it's sort of like, we had this great conversation about like, well, like if you just stick to one thing, you're probably going to get bored. So, not having a style is okay too. Like eventually you'll just kind of develop one. I guess that said, I tend to I tend to like themes that are probably more whimsical in nature. Like I connect a lot with like stuff I did as a kid, or kids doing stuff. Now that I have friends who have kids, it's kind of like sort of like how kids are just completely enamored with something. I mean, I guess pets are the same way, but usually they're more enamored with like food or getting into something they're not supposed to. But so I think it's definitely sort of on the cute and whimsical side more than anything else. But I don't know. I like a whole bunch of techniques, so it's not always the same. And it's kind of funny because like I just started doing a series for some friends of mine that I did a couple coloring lives with, but like aren't really card makers. So it was kind of like going back to like a, well, I'm starting out again. Like, how do you avoid the problem of like, I want to buy all the things, right? Because you're sort of like, well, scan and cuts are neat, and they're $400, and then you're like, ooh, paper, and it's sort of like how do you not like spend a lot of your paycheck on it? I think is always sort of a challenge when you're new, and I mean just like how do you buy things you're going to use? Because I think it like while you're figuring it out, I don't know. I always have the tendency to
Oh.
like want the full set of everything, so it's a challenge.
Yeah, well, let's dig into that a little bit. By the way, Danny is here. Welcome, my friend. Hi, Danny. Um, now, since you brought it up, I didn't think to ask this, but your question about, how do you know what to buy when you're first getting into paper crafting? So how did you decide? I mean, did you
Uh-uh.
like do research? Did you just follow your gut instincts? Did you was there a designer who said these are the things, get them? How did you decide?
I don't think so. Like, I really like the concept of the kits. I think what was happening at the time because we weren't going anywhere, and all these
Yeah.
like art subscription boxes were huge things where it's like, hey, get some cool materials, and I was like, well, I like that in sort of the mixed media realm because it's like I can try this thing and not have to buy full sizes of everything. So I really like that. So I very much gravitated towards the card kits, and then I really gravitated towards spellbinders and sort of I feel like they do Christmas really strongly.
Mhm.
So I started consuming a lot of that content, and then picked up card kits, and obviously like everybody makes card kits now, but I don't know. I really like the kit approach,
Yeah.
and I still do. I've gotten into other things, but I mean, I think if you find an art style you like kits are a great way to just sort of dip your toe in and say like, hey, do I like this brand before buying some of the more
Yeah.
expensive stuff?
Yeah, and I think that that really resonates with me. I didn't actually It's interesting because I didn't actually discover kits, until because I'd been crafting and scrapbooking and stuff for a while, but, I mostly bought stuff, and then I came to, like, discover that you can kind of get more value for your money in the sense when you buy things as kits. And then that started to get me really hooked on on the whole concept of kits and trying all the different kits out. And I think you kind of have your finger on the pulse of the idea that as crafters sometimes we want all the things. So we've got Danny that says I have that disease, want to buy all the things. Angela says I certainly have full set syndrome. Which is something that you mentioned as well. And Irene also agrees with full set syndrome. And Danny says full set syndrome is so real here. Yeah. So how do you, I mean, do you feel like you need like a full collection or like all the new releases that come out? Um, or is it just that you don't know what you want and that's why you want all the things? Or do you feel like, oh, you're missing out if you don't have all of these things?
I don't think you're really missing out, but I think the more email lists you're on for brands that tell you about all the new cool things they're releasing, the more you're likely to say like, oh wow, I would love to do something with that.
Uh-huh.
Um, I've like recently I've tended to gravitate towards like only buy things when I have a specific project in mind.
Me too.
A cricket, well, like a cricket crafter who's since passed away, but I followed, had a really good idea, which was basically like buy the tools you need and like try and buy something at least of sort of intermediate quality so it's not going to fall apart or cause you drama, but like just buy the stuff you need for one project and do that. And then once you're done with that project, buy the stuff you need for your next project. And yeah, I think most of us have like a pile of projects we want to do or things we bought because they look cool and we just haven't like started making a project yet. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's always kind of it's a challenge to not buy all the cool new stuff, especially when you see people playing with it and you're like, oh, I could do my riff on that and that'd be really neat.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting take. It's so interesting because I do feel like sometimes I could totally see from the perspective of somebody who is getting into the craft for the first time being so overwhelmed by all the things that you could be getting and then not really knowing what to do with it all once you have it.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I think as a new person, like the thing you should realize is even if the kit comes with a bunch of components, like you don't need to use all of them.
yeah.
It's perfectly reasonable to say like, I'm going to buy this kit and I know it comes with dies and stamps and, you know, pretty things that are already self-adhesive, but like like you can just not use the stamps or the dies. I mean, and you're still going to have a really fun time. So, I
Right.
mean, I think now that there's so many like good sources of free card sketches out there, like it just becomes a lot easier too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Meg's in the house now. Welcome, Meg. Hi. We have oh, this is I should have used this handle. The slow crafter. That's me. I'm a really slow crafter also. Welcome, my friend. I love your YouTube handle. She says, "Nice to see your face, Jay." So, wonderful. So we do have a lot of folks who are sharing their thoughts as well on wanting, needing all the things, and I love this too. Irene says, "I do the thing where I buy everything and am then totally overwhelmed and end up making nothing." That's happened for me too. And it's so easy to get in that loop for me anyways because of, Kendra's statement here. She says, "I'm a sucker for sales." Which, if you are familiar with my channel, you know I love a good sale. So, lots of folks are on that train too. Um, so very, very cool. Um, yes, Stamper Girl says, "Oh, this is so cool. This is going on both YouTube accounts." Yeah, we're streaming both to my channel and to Jay's channel. So welcome wherever you're joining from. And for those who are joining after I made my sort of YouTube general statements of, "Could you please like the stream?" And we're still pretty early, so if you could also please share the stream, and that way somebody who sees your share might be able to join us live and, be a part of this conversation, get to meet Jay as well. So, whether you're live or catching this on replay, do hit that like button because it does help, and that way more people can get to meet Jay because he's totally awesome. So, so our original question was, let's flip back to our original question. So how you would describe your style. We got rabbit holed a little bit, which is my
Yep.
fault. But so, so that's great that you tried different things and enjoyed different things. You had mentioned just in your evolution as a crafter that did you say that you were painting before
Oh
paper
yeah,
crafting?
I was. And I still have tons of paint, so it's sort of like it's neat because now if I want to do collage or something, I'm like, oh, I probably have that paint color in at least one line.
Yeah. What kind of paint? Like acrylic painting or
So I
watercolor?
started with watercolor, and then I moved over to acrylic because like watercolor is very flat, and I like some of the dimension you can get with acrylic paint.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I like that a lot, and sort of painting with a palette knife is kind of an interesting thing. My dad's a painter as well, so like
Oh,
and he's
Oh,
worked primarily in oils. I mean, like that wasn't his career, but that was sort of his retirement hobby. And he's
okay.
done some really cool work. I should dig some up and share it with the group at some point. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I wasn't really interested in oils because like I don't have a huge space and I have pets and like some of the things some of the chemicals you need to deal with oil paint are kind of gnarly to have around if you don't have like a separate area to put it. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah. So
but
do
yeah,
you bring, because you're getting into coloring with like alcohol markers and whatnot. So
I am,
are
yeah.
you still painting? Are you still doing that form of art? Have you brought it into your card making, or do you like to keep them separate? Or
I've been doing primarily card making. I haven't brought it in a lot, but I probably should because I've seen some really awesome cards by Stamper Girl and others that have used watercolor, and it's a really
yeah.
interesting medium. Sometimes somewhat unforgiving, but I mean that's the thing that kind of makes it interesting. But I forget who it was. Someone said that the ultimate challenge to watercolor is patience, and I think that's true because there's a lot of like letting something dry in between layers.
Yes.
And like acrylic is the same way, where it's like I don't know. I moved to cards because I like that they feel less precious. Like I don't mind
Oh,
because I
yeah.
can give it away, and then it's like I don't have to have a painting in my house forever.
Yeah.
Then I had like a limited amount of people I could just like randomly gift paintings to, and I was kind of like, it would be nice if these things didn't live in my house anymore. So anyway, I
That's
haven't
a
done a lot of
cool
painting, but it's a lot of fun when you do.
yeah, that's a cool way of thinking about it, though, is in terms of your cards being a bit of art that you get to share. And so having these like miniature sort of canvases to uh make a piece and have more people see it.
And
Stamper Girl
I think
says,
you see that in some of the designs too, right? Because like the design I like to do, if like not using card sketches, is basically like here's some pattern paper or an accent color and basically a white canvas that I'll go and do something on.
yeah, yeah. So Delete Stamper Girl says Jay likes to get messy, and I love that.
Yeah,
Lynn is here. Welcome, Lynn. Lynn says she would love to see some of your dad's artwork. So definitely share it to
I'll see if I can dig some up. If
yeah.
not, I'm seeing them in a couple days, so I can just take some pictures too.
Okay.
It
Cool.
it's really interesting. I mean, I guess I should say like I live in the southern or in the Midwest, so he's done a lot of really interesting landscapes too about barns and other farmy things. So that's kind of it's interesting. He has a lot of that and a lot of stuff from Cape Cod, so it's kind of a interesting like juxtaposition of like very natural stuff, but I'll definitely do that because it's really cool work.
Yeah, this is funny. So T says, LOL, it's that you have to let layers dry. This was in
Yep.
and that's why I don't think that I was the one who said what you quoted earlier, but I definitely the sentiment resonates with me as well. I think Delise commented on something that I did that was with watercolors, and I was like, "Yeah, I like it, but I would never do that again because it just took way too long."
Well, and like she's done
Um,
some paint. I don't know if you'd call them paintings or painted die cuts or whatever. I didn't know what the it's all like. Just calling them card elements seems a little not giving them their due. But it's like
oh,
she was somebody. One of her paintings. It was like the the
oh no.
has like
Let's
40 layers on it.
Okay, you popped out and then you popped back in. Can you repeat
Oh,
what that
that's
last
weird.
thing?
Oh, I was gonna say like she had done something and it had like I don't know 15 or 20 or 30 layers on it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't have the patience for that.
Yeah, yeah. This is this is funny. Irene says watercoloring is literally watching paint dry. But she does love it. Yeah. It's definitely fun to do, but for me, it's one of those things where I feel like I have to have a second project going just for that, that in between time when you're just waiting.
Yeah, when I was doing cards, what I do is I get one of those like inexpensive cutting mats, and I just tape the card down to that, and then it's like you could just move those and let them dry for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Good call. Welcome, Crafty Songbird 56. Hello, my friend. Welcome. Um, all right. So just going back to hit a couple more um comments. T did say earlier that you don't need to define a style if you don't want. And I definitely agree with that. Do you just in terms of have you applied to a lot of design teams where they've asked that?
Actually, oddly, the answer is no. I've applied to
Really?
design teams. Well, most of the time, what they wanted is to just look at your Instagram, right? Like
Uh-huh.
how can I put it? Like, I don't think they care how you describe yourself. I think they just want to see the work and say, like, hey, does that line up with my brand or not? But
Interesting.
I've
Okay.
seen I I've seen the question a few times, but I actually on the design teams I'm applied for, I don't think it was ever really asked.
Okay. That's good. Because I've seen the question a lot, and I always struggle a little bit to answer. I was gonna ask you how you answer, but I guess, you haven't seen that too much in your experience of, the teams that you've applied to,
Yeah, I'm
which
not sure why that's the case. I think the
yeah.
teams I've applied to, like, very few of them have had like essay questions, really. Like, it's been more like, you know, here, I like your info and I want your socials, and I'm going to go look at your socials, and like that's
Right.
your resume, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, your body of work kinda speaks for itself, however you like to think of yourself, I guess, in the sense. Um, so T, not afraid of color for says, "That's funny, most of my work is grunge and got picked for it, not too shabby." Well, the thing is that and this is what I tell, whoever is willing to listen to me talk, uh, and that is you never know what a design team, is looking for because sometimes they might be looking for somebody who really embodies their brand, but they could equally be looking for somebody whose style is not in line with their brand, and that is to broaden the appeal of their products because the more ways I feel, the more ways that you can show a product being used in different styles, in different types of makes, etc., I feel like you have a better chance of broadening your audience and your appeal. And so some designers might think of themselves as not a good fit for a particular company, but that doesn't mean that, if you enjoy their products and you like working with them and you think that you can showcase them well in whatever it happens to be that your brand or your style is, then you should still apply to that company because you never know. That might be something that they're looking for in their design team. So T, I'm not surprised that you got picked because you're so talented and I think it was smart for Not Too Shabby to pick you up and get to show their products in a different way and to a new audience so that maybe now folks who follow you and who like your style who may never have seen a way to use, the cutesy kind of stamps that Not Too Shabby does in that way. Now they're seeing the product in a whole other light, including other products in that, same or similar style. So I think it makes sense that you're on you're on that team with us. So, okay, we have a
Yeah, and I mean, you
question.
can always like put vintage photo or like sepia watercolor over anything. You can like look vintage,
Yeah.
grungy.
Yes, you could make anything look vintage with a little, vintage photo ink. We'll take this question now from Stacy. Stacy she wants to know, Jay, how has your card making changed over the years?
I think I always have like a technique I'm really interested in at the time. So I think that it's changed in that I recently, well, I don't know. I think it always changes in that like I have sort of a technique I'm playing around with, and then that tends to work itself in. I think is probably in the major way. I mean, like I've been doing a lot more alcohol ink coloring recently. I was doing some collage stuff before then. I think I was really into kits for a while, and now it's sort of like kits are nice, but I have enough stuff. Oh, excuse me, that I could like make a card without needing a kit. So I don't know.
Wow.
It's interesting. Although I still love uh, either like pre-colored die cuts or ephemera or whatever you want to call them,
Yeah.
because it just like sometimes you don't want to color things from scratch or paint from scratch. You just want to like make a cute thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love ephemera too. Plus, like, they're good for when you need a card quick. Because it's faster sometimes and well, faster always because I'm a slow colorist. So it always takes me forever to color anything.
Yeah, I just really love like floral kind of things. I mean, not necessarily flowers, but like any of those like winter leaves or fall leaves or spring garden leaves, like that kind of stuff, because you can just like die cut it out of a bunch of different colors of cardstock and just start like collaging with it, and it looks really complicated, but probably only took you like 5 minutes.
Yeah, awesome. So really you would say then that your card making has evolved just based on the introduction of like new media or new
I think
techniques.
so.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There's always a lot to learn. I feel that way too, because there's always like, a new fun fold to learn, a new, media to play with. So I definitely, that's one of the things I enjoy about our craft as well. Meg says, "Yes, Jay, your tastes can change rapidly in this business." Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into our next question. And so without getting too much into the specifics, so we're not going to be naming names just so that anyone watching um live or on replay, Jay is going to be just talking about generalities. So let's not ask him any specific questions about any specific companies or design teams he's on or any individuals. um but it might help everybody who's watching this just to have a little bit of context in terms of the experience that you have had so far with design teams. So, how many different teams have you been on, and for how long have you been designing for design teams?
I think I've been designing for I did the math on this, and it's something like 10 or 11 months. And I've been on, depending on how you count, either 4 or 5 different teams. Um, so I guest designed for one company for 2 releases. And then I was on 2 different influencer teams. One was more of a challenge team, and one was more of a just a normal brand team.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think let me see. I'm currently on 3, and I actually think that like if you're getting into it, like the sort of more entry, the influencer team is a lot nicer because you have a lot less like you need to definitely do this on this date kind of things. So
Mm-hmm.
especially if you have another job, like,
Yeah.
and I think
Well,
you
that's a
can. I mean, I think the more you're on, the more like time management becomes a thing.
okay. That's a good point in terms of just setting the context. So you still work full time, yeah? This is
Yep.
not this is not like a crafting is not a full-time gig for you.
Yeah, and I mean, this will probably sound weird, but like, I don't want it to be. I like being more of a hobbyist. You
Okay.
know, it would be cool if I got all my stuff for free, or via social media stuff, like it kind of financed itself
Yeah.
versus like it being a hobby I dump money into because it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, I like my job. I don't know that, I feel like based on another part-time job I had that like if it became a full-time job, it would become your job and then it would be a lot harder for it to be fun and relaxing. You know, it would
Interesting.
seem more
Yeah.
like, you know,
It
I mean,
would
it would
feel more
almost
like
be
work.
more like, yeah, I mean, it would be more like somewhere between freelance and trying to advance a brand, like somewhere in that kind of niche. Like, I feel like if you were doing it as your job, like you'd always think of like, well, what's the next thing I can do? You know, what is that going to achieve for me? You know?
Yes. Yeah. That's very true. And Angela says yes, crafting remaining a hobby keeps the joy in it.
Yeah.
Um, oh, Lynn wants to know if you don't mind sharing, what is your full-time job?
So I'm a software developer full time. I've sort of dabbled between software development and data analysis, but basically that. So I'm basically an IT guy. Uh,
You guys.
That's my, on my in my day job, which I mean I think is why I've enjoyed working with Lynn on various projects because like you have sort of a similar background, so that we kind of jive on the like sort of getting information ahead of time so you can plan, and having specific requirements is very much a thing
Yeah.
that makes it a lot easier for me. You know, I think
Yes.
when I've been on teams where it's been more like just open ended and do whatever, I mean, I think that's a little harder to get your head around when you're new.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, my friend. So, I think what anyone who's been in the software development, through that cycle from any aspect, because I've only been on it from the project management side of things, but whether you're the developer or the project manager, it's just the details, the schedule, the timelines, they are all the things that I crave. So, but you've got a lot of folks in the chat who are like you, where they like keeping their crafting a hobby. I think Angela said that. Danny did. I've got Cynthia's comment up on the screen as well. So definitely, you're not alone in that viewpoint for sure. And I agree 100% that um, if you are coming at it from the with the goal of maybe making it into a living, or earning from it, which I haven't been shy about sharing that is my goal. You're absolutely right that everything then becomes very strategic in terms of choosing how you're spending your time
Yeah,
and
I
what you
remember
do.
listening to like a podcast from I think this was actually like a fitness influencer, but he was saying basically like at a certain point you just can't turn off that part of your brain where you're like, well, like what font should I use? You know, how did this perform last time? You know, like thinking through verbiage and all that stuff. And it's like,
Mhm.
you know, I feel like if it became your job, that would just be sort of you're just doing that all the time, basically.
Yeah, it definitely becomes a different lens that you look at things through, and I don't think that it necessarily, for me anyways, takes the joy out of it, but it adds, like, work. So there's the joy of the crafting,
Mm.
you know what I mean? But that remains a very fun, creative part of the whole thing, but then there's another layer of work that gets added on top of it if you are trying to, you know, take your crafting to the point where it might be like a little bit of a living for you. Um,
Yeah, I
so,
agree. I mean, I think that's something that's worth. I don't know if anyone ever puts that on like design team calls, but it's sort of like, well, crafting on the internet, like you're going to have this whole layer of things that isn't crafting that you're going to be doing. So, you know, if you want to
yes.
make it, if you like the hobby aspect of it, like realize like if you want free stuff, it's more of a
Yeah,
job than a
we're
hobby. But
definitely
yeah.
gonna get into that for sure. I will definitely pick your brain on that. Before we move on to it though, Angela says, "So you must be good with the tech side of YouTubing. I really struggle with the tech side." And Cynthia says, "I'm so envious of your tech skills." And Meg says, "Angela, I struggle with tech too." So do you find that coming from a technical background that let's scratch into the surface of the non-crafting things that do come with design team work. Do you find that being that you're from sort of a tech IT background that some of that comes more easily to you, or that your learning curve is a lot lower?
I think yes. However, I think the challenge that you pick up is, and I think you touched on this somewhere, but it's like, how do you not buy the pro version of everything, right? Because it's sort of like, well, if you want the nicer version of StreamYard, it's $30 a month, and if you want the nicer version of Canva, that costs money too. And it's sort of like,
Mhm.
at a certain point, there's like the learning I think is easier, but you also tend to want to dive down the rabbit hole of like,
Yeah,
what options could I possibly do?
yeah. Well, that's true because it's hard sometimes to get a little bit too into the weeds on, like, really geeking out on some of the some of the things
Hmm.
and realizing maybe that's not the best, way to spend your time. So, yeah, so there's lots of folks who are, naming just a few of the things that go into, DT work that may not necessarily be advertised. We'll get back into that in a bit. Um, let's, uh let's go to so that gives us some really good before we move on though, I do wanna just, note that so even though you've been on DTs for maybe less than a year and maybe less than a handful, it does sound like you have a pretty broad, um, pretty diverse, set of experiences though, from guest DTing, from, being on design teams that are, more like a challenge versus a product producing company. You mentioned something about being on influencer teams. Can you talk a little bit about how that's different than a design team for folks who may not know?
Yeah, I mean, typically what you're talking about is compensation and requirements, basically. So you can think of it just like any other job like that. So typically on a conventional design team, you'll get product for whatever the upcoming release is, which you'll generally not pay for. You may or may not get uh, some fairly lucrative discounts towards whatever the brand is as well. Um, and I would say on the challenge team I was on, that was a design team. With that, also, you wouldn't necessarily get things specific to the challenge, but there was some like product compensation essentially.
Mhm.
The trade off is that you generally have more requirements, and typically, I'll say participation in things is not really optional. Like if the team's doing something, it's assumed that you're going to be contributing to that.
Yes.
And I would say also you have a lot more like you're expected to create an social media project every some amount of time. I'll say, and depending on the team, that may be specifically scheduled, or it may be just sort of like do something this month. Um,
Mhm.
I guess we'll get into more of the DT managers and how they vary later on in this chat, but like every design team is a little bit different, but basically that's sort of the design team side. Both influencer teams I've been on were basically the requirements were just produce something once a quarter, and and you basically would get a brand discount as a result or some
Mhm.
other form of compensation. But it was it wasn't really tangible product, right? But
Okay.
I think if you're coming at it as a hobby, the influencer team is a lot more flexible because if you have a job that could go nuts at any point, right? Like sometimes having a more flexible requirement is really nice because then you don't wind up having. This hasn't happened to me, but other people have talked about, life happens and then you kind of basically have to talk to your design team manager or the brand owner and say, hey, this is happening and where do we go from here?
Yeah. So to sum up, it sounds like a more traditional design team, if we were to compare it to something that probably is more widely understood, is sort of like a job. You get paid to do a thing and you do a thing. And an influencer team is more like an internship where like you can show up, you can, or maybe a volunteer job, you know?
Hmm.
Maybe it's more like that, like a nonprofit volunteer gig where yeah, you're on the volunteer team, show up, when you show up, do the things, and if you can't show up, not a huge deal. We'll be here next month if you're available. That is it kind of like
Yeah,
that?
I think that's fair. And I think the internship comparison is really good because it's definitely going to get you exposure to people on sort of the other on sort of the I don't know brother or sister team, right? You're going to get to know those people and get to know generally the owner or manager of the brand a lot more. So I mean, it's going to definitely give you exposure. So like you might want to start on the influencer team, and then if that would put you in a very good position if you applied for a design team because you'd basically be a non-commodity at that point.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Good point. T says the plus part, you get to meet new fun people. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, so thanks for giving us that little bit of just broad strokes of your design team experience. So you kind of touched on a little bit of this, but for you personally, why did you first join a design team? Um, would definitely love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I'll say my path is a little weird, and then I joined a design team for something that I haven't gotten on any design team. So that's
Oh,
a little bit strange. So like I had joined and was like really looking for like some level of like mentorship, but that's just like not a thing that design teams do. Like design teams,
interesting.
I mean, like design teams are much more like I'm hiring you as field marketing, and I want you to like make some products that promote whatever you're doing, right? Whatever the company or challenge or whatever, right? So I think I didn't quite understand that. So I was sort of like, so I was much more interested in like mentorship, and I was much more interested in sort of the networking aspect of it to like get to know other crafters. Because in some of my other arts and crafts stuff, I found that it was like hard to find communities of people just to sort of like do stuff with and share and like appreciate other people's takes on sort of the same ideas. So anyway, it was mostly networking, and I think to a certain degree, like, hey, if it helps my social platforms, that'd be cool too. But and I mean, I think the other thing that contributed was sort of this I'll say kind of misguided idea that like if you get onto a design team, you're like a real designer, with air quotes. I think there's sort of a when you're new, it's sort of like I don't know like how
You
long
feel
I'm
like
new. It was kind of like, well, how do you become like a respected crafter, right? So I think that kind of played in. Although
you
if I
feel
were
like being on a design team is a sort of validation of
yeah,
you as
exactly.
a crafter? Mm.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if you apply the lens you had mentioned before, which is like think of it like a business team, right? Like you're going to need different things at different times to balance that team. So it's not necessary, and you don't know who's in your candidate pool essentially. I mean, in
Yeah.
either. instance. So I mean, it's sort of like, well, it's not necessarily. I guess I'd say looking back, if I were to give myself advice, it would be like you're going to meet a lot of really cool people, but like it's not going to make you feel validated the way you think. Like you're going to get on a design team and then like, magic unicorns will come and clean your craft room and like it will just be like flawless and perfect, So I think and I think it's seen some conversations in DT 101 about this too, where it's like, you attach probably more significance to it than it really needs to be.
Yeah.
Like think of it more I think like if you can get more in the mindset of like an internship or a part-time job, like that's really what you should expect. But I think I don't know. Others and especially me like really got into the like I really want to like it seems like the next thing I should do, so I really want to do that.
Yeah. So, going back to your original statement, because you had me like at the edge of my seat when you said the
Oh yeah,
reason
no,
the reason why you joined was something that you have not found yet, and that is mentorship. What what were you so when you say
so
mentorship?
I guess I should correct this and say I have found mentorship, but it hasn't been through any design team.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully what you're referring to is DT 101, which is plug for my and Danny's group, but,
Yeah, I guess I'll
um
split this into two halves. So I think the mentorship that you are going to get on a design team and that I've received is you're going to have people who are going to suggest things about how you post stuff, whether they're videos or photos or whatever. So I think you're going to get mentorship in how to be an adult. But I think if you come from like a technical background or a business background, it's like, and you're, I'll say, out of college, you've probably already learned that from somebody. So I think
Mhm.
you'll definitely get that. But no, the mentorship that I've gotten from other sources that's been the most helpful is sort of like, as someone who's fairly new, it's sort of like, hey, what should I focus on, right?
Yeah.
Like, I
Were
could take
you
thousands of classes, which would be valuable, like
were you
essentially.
looking for mentorship in on the crafting side of things, like how to be a better crafter, or were you looking for mentorship on the everything else you have to do as a design team member side of things, like the socials and, how to promote and how to take photos and how to all the things.
I think from the business world, the things I've missed the most on most design teams, or really, I thus far on those kind of things, is sort of like you don't have performance reviews, right? Like you reach the end of
Mhm.
your term and you might be renewed and you might be not, and that has
Oh,
nothing.
yeah.
I mean, it may have nothing to do with the quality of the work, right? But so like I think it would be cool. Like I feel like if I had a design team, I'd want to sort of like have one-on-ones with people every so often, and basically like just give them my opinion of how things are going, because a lot of it is just kind of a black box, which makes sense if you're talking about freelance work, right? Like you either get offered a new gig or you
Mhm.
don't, but that doesn't necessarily directly translate to how well you're doing.
Yeah. So but I'm still not sure what side of mentorship you were hoping to get though. Like on the technical side of being and sharing and taking photos, or more on the how to, be better at your craft?
Hmm. I think I was hoping for both. I've
Okay.
definitely gotten more. I don't know that I It's more like you get mentorship on, I guess, sort of, and like, I guess ultimately the thing that would be super helpful is like mentorship about you as a crafter on the internet,
Okay.
which kind of encompasses both halves. But I think it's also like, how can I put this tactfully? Like people everybody accepts feedback differently. So, and we have a really friendly community. So I think it's very rare that someone's going to like look at your project and say something like, this is really cool, but like if you had picked green rather than blue, like you would have had more contrast in this project or something. So I think like I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's all kind of rolled up together for me.
Okay. Good to know. Interesting perspective. Okay, so Danny does say that there are some DTs that do that, just FYI. But she also says, I also am nosy and always ask how I'm doing. And I have to say, before you respond to this comment, that Danny is a big proponent, and I 100% agree, of communication and asking questions. And so it doesn't surprise me one bit that Danny has asked, her DT, management chain, how she's doing. And so is that something that you've ever done, Jade, like to ask your DT leads and DT managers?
I don't think I ever have actually.
Is that
It's
because
probably a good idea. I mean, like even in that, like it would just open the door so that you could sort of let them know that like you're willing to accept feedback. Because I
yeah,
think I'll say in the professional space, right? There are some people who are going to take feedback very personally,
yeah.
even if your feedback is like, "Hey, you're doing A- work, and you might want to work on these two things to make it A plus," right?
Right,
So
yeah.
I think I understand why it's not a thing people do because you could potentially cause a bunch of drama that just like doesn't really help anybody.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I mean, I think your suggestion and Danny's are a good one, which is like you can like if you're curious about that, it's definitely worth asking.
Yeah. I mean, I've never done it, and I never thought to, but I think seeing that Danny has definitely makes me think maybe I should do more of that. Um so that's definitely, thanks Danny for sharing that.
Yeah,
And
good idea. I guess the other thing is not to like totally plug your group, but like I feel like some of the discussions on DT 101 have been really helpful because, because you're not bound to someone who's like your boss. Like I feel like they can be slightly more open. Like you can say like, "Hey, what do you think of this project?" Or I remember we had a really cool, very long thread, and there were some really smart people who jumped in on it who had like actual on photos, but there were some people who had backgrounds in graphic design and photography who would jump in with opinions that were like super helpful.
yeah, and so um yeah, and I think that that's one of the motivations for why I wanted to start DT 101. And I know Danny, I I roped Danny in because I hope you don't regret it, Danny, but she said at the end of Let's Talk Design Teams Part 2 that, she would love to be a mentor, and that was all I needed to hear. And so we started DT 101 on the heels of I think literally after that stream ended, I messaged Danny and said, "I've been wanting to do this thing. Will you do it with me?" And she said yes, thankfully. But that is why we started that group, because to your point, Jay, it can be hard sometimes to ask like essentially your boss, how you're doing, and sometimes it might be a little bit it might feel easier to ask like, I think did you say like a disinterested party
Yeah, or like
for
a neutral party.
a
I
neutral
mean, I
party.
guess I don't know if I've shared this story with you, but I will now. Like after one of your sort of design team streams, I won't mention who did this, but someone reached out to me and offered me helpful critique, and it was like super helpful because it's sort of like from a when you covered kind of the normal stuff that you would want to know, right? Like, well, what would you focus on? Like, if you are evaluating my Instagram, like, what do you see that's good? What do you see that's bad? And I think the other piece of advice I got that was really helpful, at least for me, was like, get to know I guess there are two things. One was like, think about what your elevator pitch would be if you were talking to, let's say, the owner of a brand you're really interested in. Like, what would you tell them about you and why you want to really be part of, you know, uh,
Mhm.
their team? And I think the other thing that I'll say I'm very, very bad at, but is good to keep in mind is like if you get a position on a team, like, or you're a fan of a brand and are trying to get on their team, like really be careful how much work you're doing for free, because like if you want to drive this like it's a part-time job or something, like essentially like appreciate the requirements of the design team, but treat those more like a design brief, or like or like on a project, like the spec you're supposed to deliver. Like,
Yeah.
if you're supposed to deliver, I guess I'll say, like, if you're supposed to deliver like a 10-minute presentation, like don't deliver a 4-hour presentation, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
But
Um,
anyway, DT 101, it's awesome. You should join. And people are people, if you ask for direct feedback, people will definitely provide it.
yeah. Thanks for the plug. I did, put a link in the chat, so whether you're on my channel, you'll see that as a chat coming from me. If you're on Jay's channel, you'll see that as a chat, coming from Jay. So, T says, "Oh my gosh, Jay, I feel that to my soul." Aw. Um, yeah, so I think the thing that well, I'm glad that you're feeling that the community is working the way that, I know I intended. I'm sure Danny would agree, with DT 101 being that it's not, um, it's not a place where we're trying to be critical, to be mean or anything, but it's in the spirit of just offering different opinions. And one of the things that, he said is that it can be difficult to offer that, critique or, offer your opinion, for fear of hurting someone's feelings. And I think
I
maybe
agree.
yeah, 'cause you said that too, like, maybe that's not why, DT leads or owners or managers want to open a whole can of worms by offering, what they would consider helpful feedback, but what might be received in a way that causes possibly some hurt feelings. And so why do that when you don't have to? But that's why I like how you framed, your answer to my earlier question, in that by asking, how am I doing? You're kind of letting them know that you're open to having that conversation and to getting that feedback. And so I think that's a nice kind of way of communicating and sort of getting on the same page if that's something that you're looking for, to put that out there, that you're receptive to to getting that sort of feedback.
Yeah, and I guess the other, not to like plug your community more, but I mean, I think the other
Plug away, my
conversation
friend.
that came up there that was really interesting, was really around sort of, even if you're a professional or semi-professional and sort of understand how design teams work, like it's still normal and human to have like emotional reactions when you like don't get on particular teams. So it's like, even though it's part of the process, like I forget who was talking about it, but it was a really good conversation of sort of like, it's okay to feel unhappy about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to really want to get a position on a team. Like, that stuff's not super productive to actually applying to teams, but like, realize we're all like, everybody's human and we all kind of have the same, or we all have sort of similar emotional reactions to that.
Yeah. Danny's right there with you. I'm right there with you too. It's only human, right? If you applied for a thing, you wanted it, and if you didn't get it, then there's a little bit of sadness that comes with that. And I
Even
think
if you're really good, right? Like you could have
Mhm.
a similar style to someone already on the team, and you could be in the, I don't know, let's pick a style I don't do, vintage. Let's say you're in the top, like maybe you're in the top 5% of crafters who does awesome vintage stuff. Well, if the team already has two other people who do vintage stuff, they
Yeah,
might, pass on you for somebody who has a style they're not used to. So, you know,
absolutely. Yep. So that's why you can't always um take that sort of well, we'll just call it what it is, rejection, to be any sort of a critique on you as a crafter. So to your exact point that you just made, you could be very like you could be the best at what you're doing, but that's just not what they're looking for right now. And so not making it onto a team doesn't mean that you're not good. It just means you're not what they need at the moment. And
yeah,
that
and
could
I
actually
think it was
change.
either you or Danny who made an interesting point that you might actually just be too good, right? That like they might be looking for someone who's more entry level because, maybe
Yep.
they have really, I mean, someone made this point, and I don't know if it was in your group or somewhere else, but it was sort of like, I want to say it. Well, I won't name names, but I think it's someone who's been very helpful for mentoring, who basically said like the two kind of cards that really do well on social media are cards that make you go, "Hey, I could make that," because it seems like something a project you could attempt, and also like aspirational cards where it's like, "Wow, I really want to make that." Like it's this wild pop-up thing with like 35 lights and sounds on it. So, I mean, I think
Yeah,
there's a lot of truth to that on design teams when you kind of look at sort of the all the projects they put out, that there's just like people who cover more range are probably going to do better long term.
I agree with that 100% too. Just from a business perspective, I think it's a wise choice. And I agree. I mean, I don't know if I was the one you heard saying that, but I have said that before where a lot of times if you're looking at things from well, I'll speak for myself. A lot of times when I look at inspiration and it's like perfectly colored, I sometimes think, well, I could never color that way, so I don't think I could ever get that stamp set to look as good as how that designer has made it look. And sometimes, that puts me off of actually buying it. But, if I see something that is, you know, put together, well executed, maybe it's not the most, perfect artist rendition and colored stamped image, it feels much more accessible to me. And I feel like, oh, that looks fabulous, and you don't have to be able to do all the things with Copics to make that look good.
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways, that can sell a product to me anyways, a lot, more successfully than seeing something that is, like, so far beyond my ability that I just don't feel like I could, achieve that. And so
Yeah, I
and
agree.
I think that, I think that in a stream, Amanda has also said, I think it was Amanda. Let's not name names because now now I don't remember, I'm questioning. But I think because we had a conversation about how I was really surprised that sometimes the projects that I put out there that I feel are, like, simpler than I like to make my interactive cards and pop-up cards and stuff, but a lot of times, those I put so much more work into, but they aren't as popular seeming anyways, if we gauge by likes and stuff, as some of my simpler projects, and somebody in the chat made the comment that, well, sometimes people just like to see things that are easy to do. if they're if they're looking for inspiration
Yeah.
of things to do with, if they've bought it or plan to buy it or want to buy it, and they want to actually be able to like get some ideas that they can maybe, case and replicate. Um, you know, a lot of times you're looking for the simpler stuff. You're not always looking for the thing that's going to take 5 hours to do because you don't have that sort of time.
Well, or I think
So,
there's also the fear of like you have the 5 hours, but like if you do the 5 hours and then you feel like the end product isn't where you want it to be, it can be really disappointing too.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, so that's awesome to kind of hear about. I know we strayed a little bit on that on that question too, but it is interesting to learn what first got you into design teams. And I'm glad you were able to find mentorship elsewhere, even if it wasn't, exactly uh, through design teams.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I feel like that sort of changed over time. Like, I mean, like once you find mentors who are going to give you good feedback, like once that's happened, you don't really need it anymore. But I
yeah,
feel like, you know, as a possible thing, DT managers could offer newer people, it would be super helpful.
yeah, absolutely. And we'll dive into that some more as well. Um, so next question for you is, what surprised you, being that you're new, and maybe before you answer this, maybe a side question to this is, what were you expecting, when you first joined your first team, and going along with that, what surprised you the most, when you did first join design teams?
I'm not sure 100% what I was expecting. I think I was very caught up with the idea of just being on a design team would like add a whole bunch of legitimacy. So like I think I was like just very happy to be like have arrived at that point.
Mm.
Which is weird because I got on the first design team I applied for, which like obviously
Wow.
isn't everybody's experience. Because I like applied and I was like, well, I'll say this has happened on multiple teams, but you apply and you're like, well, they're never going to call me because insert reason of crafter you've seen who's 19 times better than you at something. So I mean, I think so. I don't know. I think I was expecting it to be unicorns and rainbows and everything would be great, and then like magical animals would clean up my craft room because my cats don't want to do that. But so I don't know that I had like a specific realistic expectation of it. Um, but I think the thing that's the most surprising is how like it reminds me a lot more of like being on a project team where everyone gets their assignments and then they go off and do their own thing. I thought it would be a lot more chatty than they any of them have been really
Interesting.
initially. Right after being on a couple, you kind of are like, well, you know, this is a gig for people, and like they don't really want to like they're going to want to chat and hang out in things that aren't work, right? So like the community groups are a lot better for that. But
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that surprised me the most, and just how nice everybody was. I found that surprising.
You weren't
Does
expecting folks
that?
to be nice?
Well, I mean, I think like from the professional sphere, it's sort of like if you screw something up, people usually tell you. So I mean, I think it's sort of like I was expecting it to be more internship like, where it's sort of like, hey, you did this, and I have 37 notes on how you could have done that differently. Um, so I mean, I think well, like that not being there was had some like initial issues. Like there, the flip side was like, you definitely feel accepted by your peers. I would say.
Yeah. So so I guess were you expecting more of a um kind of like like a group assignment team sort of atmosphere where there's
Yeah, I think
more
so.
okay.
Yeah, where there's sort of more discussion, where it's much more like, hey, we're on an I team together, and like, hey, you're going to go and deal with all the security stuff, and I'm going to build this part of it, and you're going to build that part of it, and then we're going to come back and together, and like it'll be done, right? It's much more like, um, well, I guess I'll say the experience is much more like everyone gets a design brief, you go off and do your own thing, essentially.
Yeah. So I guess it's less that we're all working towards a project and we're all,
Yeah, that's fair.
you know what I mean? Like, because we're not like, there's no daily stand-ups or, you don't
Right,
scrub,
exactly.
stuff like that.
Well,
You
and
can,
there's a lot of like, at the end of the day, what the people running the team want is a whole bunch of different takes. So it's sort of like everyone kind of gets the same assignment, but then does it on their own, right? So I mean, I
yeah.
think um, that's interesting, but I think that also leads to sort of a level of non-competition, because it's like everyone's kind of in their own lane doing their own style. So there's not a lot of like, worrying about whose card is the best, because like they all are sort of filling a different niche.
Right, right. T T says no team huddles. Yeah. There isn't. It's interesting because I it's been so long now since when I first joined my team, but now that you've said it though, Jay, I think I was expecting the same thing in that I was expecting more um not collaboration, like we would all help each other on our projects or anything like that,
Yeah.
but more like chatter about, "Well, here's what I'm thinking of doing," and
Hmm.
maybe, other people would share their thoughts on things, um, and that there would be a more of an maybe not so much like working together on a project, but more like an exchange of ideas.
Yeah,
And
I agree. That's a very good way to put it. I think that's more what I was thinking it would be like. I mean, maybe even more than like a mentorship thing, like it would just be more like discussion about the thing.
interesting. Do you feel, even though you're on a team, that because there's a lack of that, that you feel like you're working in isolation?
Like at this point, no, because I have so many crafty friends. Like there's just lots of people I could bounce an idea off of, or like if I'm doing something, I'm like, I don't know how this is coming out. I think that's much more of an initial challenge, because I guess to plagiarize Deleuze slightly, like everybody eventually finds their tribe of people who are like get their vibe and like are willing to have those conversations. It's just generally that's not like a thing that you're likely to get from your design team, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It really does, and the reason why I'm, like, flashing back is because when I first started to join DTs, I didn't know any other crafters, and for me, why I asked that particular question is because I did feel I was still working very siloed, in my own, in very much so in my own little lane, in my own little world, and even though I like what T said, because there's the word team, there was a little bit of that expectation that I would have, like, this immediate community that I'm, like, plugged into, and then could then, bounce ideas from. Now, I have to say though that has happened, but with individuals on teams, and so now those individuals are friends, even though, we're not on the same teams with each other necessarily. So to your point, like, I'm finding that sort of give and take of ideas, and that tribe, like Delise and you have said, outside of design teams. But I when I first started, I did expect to that would be something that would help me to, like, as a crafter, kind of improve. To your point of mentorship, like, just having, for me personally, not having any personal friends who craft, I was kind of looking forward to having those sorts of conversations with other crafters.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's almost like I forget which company this is, but they call them brand ambassadors as opposed to like a design team, and I think that's almost more like accurate to what your experience is going to be. Like you're all kind of brand ambassadors, and you're putting forward, whatever the organization is in its best light. But like you're probably, and I think honestly, like finding that outside of a specific design team is nice because then like you don't have the issue of like that team, with it being very connected to a specific team, right? Like you can get feedback on whatever you happen to be working on.
Yeah.
So I
I've
think we all kind of have this thing of like we have our like projects that aren't design teams and then projects that are, and it's sort of like, well, they're both pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have found that, one of the things that I've definitely um been surprised by it in a positive way is that I have been able to kind of find friends, people who I would consider now friends, uh that originally were teammates, even if like the whole team didn't operate, in that way. Being able to click with certain individual members, I think has been something that I feel has been one of the best things to come from my experience. So it's interesting. You're like, your answers are definitely flashing me back to my original experience when I first joined. But Danny says it's interesting to hear this perspective, as I knew other crafters, so I don't think I was seeking that feeling. Yeah, and I think that is very, very, um I think it's different, like, if you are already kind of connected in the crafty community, I could see why that wouldn't be necessarily something that you were looking for, when joining a design team. And I don't think that was the reason why I joined design teams, but it was definitely something I was looking forward to that it didn't it didn't really. There's a lot of design teams that are very quiet, like, no one talks to
Hmm.
anyone.
And I
So,
mean, that's totally fine. I
yeah.
mean, like, I'm not saying it's sort of a negative. It's more of a, it just surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer no communication than having a lot of drama, so so
Yeah,
that's
I've
good.
never experienced that in any crafty group, oddly. Like, I mean, maybe it's just that crafters are just very low drama people generally, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, I'm glad that you haven't experienced that, because it's not always pleasant to be around, um, but every team is different, and even different to each person on that team, just because we all have different, perspectives and experience that shape how we feel about the exact same incident. Somebody could take one way and other people can take a different way completely. Um so that's, definitely fascinating. Yeah, Teddy says, "You are so lucky, Jay. I've seen my share of drama in the crafty world." Hopefully that doesn't mean that I'm the drama llama. No, you are not, Danny, for sure. I'm sure it's just happening around you. And Danny's been, in the craft industry for long enough, and I think anyone who has been, um in the industry and has had a lot of experience, it happens, because we're all human. So it's, only a matter of time, Jay. You'll find. I'm sure
well, I
when.
mean, I think it's like, I don't know, you can think back to professional situations, and it's like sometimes people are just higher drama than others.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. So that's awesome to hear about like what surprised you most. Okay, so let's go on to our next question. So, what has been the most challenging thing for you as a new design team member? And for everyone listening, bear in mind Jay comes from a technical background, so my guess is the technical stuff didn't throw you for a loop. But I'm
No,
wondering.
I think it's mostly that every design team is sort of a unique snowflake. So I think when you're new on any design team, and for me anyway, like trying to understand like how the team actually operates can be probably the most challenging thing. I think when I was on my first one, the other hard thing is like you kind of have this imposter syndrome thing where you don't know like why you were chosen for the design team, so you don't know if like your work is up to par or not. I think those were the hardest things initially.
Interesting. Yeah, I have this comment started from earlier in the conversation. There was a little bit of conversation. I think Danny made a comment too about imposter syndrome, but Cynthia said, I think everyone feels a little bit of imposter syndrome. One of these days, someone will figure out I don't really know how to use Copics. Well, that's no one's gonna ever think that of you, my friend. You're a beautiful illust or artist, colorist. Um, but I think that I can definitely hear you in the sense of feeling like, "Oh, how did I get so lucky?" So to your earlier comment of
Well, and you
thinking
also
that
hear people who you think are having a hard time getting on design teams, and you're like, I don't know how you're not getting on design teams. Like you're at least 10 times as talented as I am, you know.
so so did that how was why was that a challenge though? Like, did you feel like you need to be doing something different? Because 'Cause you're on the team at this point, so, like
I think it was more of a challenge in like you do a project and you're trying to figure out if it's like acceptable to the for the team, right? I think it's sort of not
even though
knowing
you're
like
on the team at this
even
point?
though I was on the team, I was like, I don't know if this project is like I don't know, you know, it's like I don't know if people are going to like this project. And I think some of that is, you know, I think there's definitely to steal Danny's point, like it would have been smarter to just ask, but I didn't do that. I was more just like, you know, concerned that like one of the like a DT manager was going to like shoot me a message, and they were like, "Yeah, I saw your project. This is terrible. Can you redo it?" You know, but
Interesting. That's so fascinating because I, um I guess I never so, unlike, you, Jay, I had applied to several teams before ever making it onto one, and I did feel that when I finally did get accepted onto a team, it did feel like a degree of validation to me. And to your point, like that whole idea of, oh, I've made it, I'm actually on one of these things,
hmm
you know? And so when I was making my projects, I don't think I ever felt like how you're describing because I just figured, well, they picked me, so that means I'm good enough. So finally.
yeah, I think
But
that would have been a healthier opinion to have. I mean, again, I think a lot of this was kind of coming from a position like you, where it's like, well, I didn't really have all my crafty friends at that point, so I
right.
think it was a little like more. I think you're more likely to kind of play head games with yourself if that's the case. Like if you have folks you're, you know, crafting with virtually or in real life who like say nice things about your stuff, I think you get less stuck in that headspace.
Yeah. Oh, this is interesting. So Meg says, that's a good point, Jay. The team leader needs to let us know what and whether we are hitting the mark they wanted us to hit. Um, I mean, I just always assume if I'm not being told otherwise that I'm doing okay.
Yep. And I think that's the truth. I mean, I think that's the case, right? Like, I think if there was anything that was of concern, like, I don't think I've had any DT manager or owner who wouldn't have just reached out if there was a thing that was like of concern to them.
Yeah. And Meg brings up a really good point that art is totally subjective. So,
Yeah.
it is in the eye of the beholder. Um, and she says, I feel there's someone out there for every form of art. So absolutely. I think that that's one of those things where I feel it could be also hard to give any sort of, whether it's asked for or not, like any sort of advice or critique or what have you, because all we can speak to is what pleases our eyes.
Yep.
So even you know what I mean? Like, so even if I'm to offer you any feedback on your cards, that's uh that's just my opinion. And that doesn't mean that it will empirically make your card any better or worse. It just might make it more pleasing to my eyes. And
Yeah. And I mean, I
that
think to Cynthia's point, like, there's also this issue of like being technically perfect doesn't actually necessarily matter that much in art. I
yeah,
mean, like, you as the artist can look at it and say, well, this thing in my head isn't the card that I have right now. But I think there's also an element of no one else has to deal with what you intended. So,
right.
like, a lot of people are just looking at the thing as it exists and liking it for what it is, too. So, I mean,
Yeah. And that's true of so many things because to what you just said, nobody knows what that could have been or what you meant it to be. But they're gonna appreciate it for what it actually is. And I feel like so long as you enjoyed your journey making it, then it's a win. So,
yeah, I agree.
because it is art, right? You put it out there, people are gonna like it, people aren't gonna like it, and they're free to have their opinions. Um, and I think that there are I think that might also just be the reason why, DT owners and leads and managers, um, they pick people because there is something about what that person is doing that resonates with them, and so that's likely why they don't have a lot of criticism, because if they looked at your socials, they kind of know what you're all about. And
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's, and I feel like you covered this in some other stream, probably when the Let's Talk Design teams, but like, DT managers and owners, like they aren't hiring an intern. They're looking at the work you have and assume you'll make similar work with their stuff. So I mean, I think there's sort of a potentially a difference in expectation where I feel like as artists we're always trying to get better, in
yeah,
some way.
yeah. I agree with that 100% because I feel like there's so much to learn and so many ways to kind of grow as a crafter. And so it's fun to kind of stretch and experience those different things. And I think that for people who are, uh, choosing who to be on their design teams, um, I think, well, I would hope that anyone who's evaluating a potential new design team member, they are looking at, your body of work kind of as a whole. And so they sort of know, uh maybe not where you're headed, but where you've been. And so if you're the type of person who is continually growing and learning, then it's likely you're going to continue to be successful, if they already like where you're at and where you've been, right? So
Yeah, I
um
agree.
so I think that um Well, one would hope that that's the case anyways. So, so that's cool. That's interesting though that you kind of found that to be challenging. So, a lot of the other aspects of design team responsibilities didn't really throw you for a loop.
I don't think so. I mean, I think given my background, it's kind of like if you have a date and the thing somebody wants, like, I'll broadly put it in the being a professional or being an adult category of like, well, if you have an obstacle, you should be talking to the person who gave you the assignment to figure out what to do about it. And if you don't, it's basically expected that you're going to deliver the work on time and on spec, right? So, I mean, it's sort of like, so I guess that element didn't phase me that much.
Mhm.
Um,
What about the
and
social
at least
media stuff, like scheduling and hops and things like that?
I didn't think it was that bad. I guess I'll say I've had really good owners and DT coordinators. So, I mean, I don't think there hasn't been a situation where I had no idea what they wanted me to do. So
Okay.
I think it's like there've been situations where things like I'm very much a like do it all early kind of person. So like I think there are definitely teams that are going to be more geared to that, and there are going to be teams that are more less geared to that, depending on where you go. Um,
Mhm.
so I mean, I think that aside, like I don't think the idea of like, hey, if a project is due on this date, like I have to do it before then. I mean, I don't think that phased me that much because like that a lot of my like professional career is like that. Like if someone wants something next week and it's going to take half a week to do, you better start. You know, because reality happens and stuff never kind of takes things aren't ever as flawless as you would like to design them to be, I guess.
Yeah. Um, so I mean that makes sense considering you're part of like schedules and project schedules and stuff like that are already a big part
Yeah,
of your
and I feel like
professional
there's
life.
so much content out there. Well, this is both a pro and a con, but I feel like there's a lot of content out there on like how to do social media. The
Uh-huh.
con is like there are also coaches out there who want to sell you stuff on how to do social media, so sort of navigating that is always a little interesting, but
Were
like I don't
you sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, but I don't think it ever really threw me that much.
Okay. Were you already big on social media? Like, were you already very active on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube before getting onto design teams?
Not as much, not consistently. Like
Okay.
I have Facebook that I use to talk to my friends that I know in real life, and friends I know on the internet. But I would say I didn't use Instagram very much.
Okay.
Like like my personal Instagram is like workout pictures and my cats basically, and like interesting like stuff I've seen traveling. But so I used it casually. I think a lot of the with design teams came a lot of the understanding scheduling and why that would be a thing that you'd want to do.
Oh, scheduling your posts early and things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, the fact that you could, and just generally, like, even in situations where you can't, like, you can still prep all your content so that you're ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Very cool. Because I think everybody's experience is a little bit different just based off of their own skill sets going in. So
Yeah.
it's often the things that I hear people struggle with is like how to add a watermark and how to schedule and post things. And so I think a lot of that can be stuff that's very new to somebody who's never been on a design team because you may not expect that you need to do um, all that other stuff after you've made your after you've made your project. There's a lot of stuff that happens after that.
Yeah. Oh, I won't spoil it now, but that's coming up in a later answer, too.
Okay. Well, then let's move to our next question then. So, um So we're getting towards the end. So folks who are live with us, if you do have questions and we haven't hit on that topic yet, do get those questions ready. But um, this will be there's one more question following this. So given your just if you were to kind of look at your first experiences on those kind of couple handful of teams that you've been on, what would you say if there are any DT managers or DT leads or owners who happen to be watching, which I hope some of you are able to check this out. What would you say would be helpful for them to do to make it easier for new members, and to caveat your answer, so that nobody reads anything into this, um, like whether this is something, you know, feel free to talk to something that either you've experienced that managers have done well, or that you haven't experienced and you wish somebody had done, and you don't have to tell us which which is which, whether you've experienced it or not. And just for your total transparency, um, you know, uh, I am a design team manager, so I'm very eager to hear your answer to this, because I'm always looking for ways that I can do a better job at being a DT lead. So I definitely would love to hear what you have to say on this topic. So if
Yeah,
you want.
you won't be surprised, but like I think the thing that helps the most is clear requirements, like what you want me to do, where do you want me to be, like that kind of stuff. Um, I found design teams that tend to use that provide that information in like Google Docs and Google Calendars and like things I can easily integrate into other ways I do scheduling. At least for me, helps a lot. I mean, obviously, some people are more on paper planners. I'm much more of a like I do it on my phone kind of person. And I guess the other thing that I think I've seen done really well recently is like when you're communicate like because every team runs differently, you're going to have to like brain dump a bunch of information. I think recently I realized that um, the thing that can be really helpful is if you sort of because I've mentored professionally a good bit. If I put on sort of my I'm talking to an intern hat and sort of say like I'm just going to give you one or two things to pay attention to right now, I think that works really well. Like when you're kind of onboarding someone onto a new team, where you can say like we're just going to talk about Instagram today, like, and we're not going to pay attention to anything else. Like we're just going to sort of say, and maybe even make it more narrow than that. Like we're just going to talk about like what my expectations are of you of like this particular hop that we do every so often, right? So I
Mhm.
think that I think that I really like the clear expectations. And I think, but paired with that is kind of like being transparent about what the schedule is. I think knowing like what you're expected to do when in advance is really nice if you're scheduling your life and design team work.
Okay.
So I think
So
I've seen both of those things done really well, but I think those are things that are, at least for me, very helpful when sort of trying to integrate into essentially a team where everybody else knows what's going on.
so if I'm hearing right, it sounds like having stuff documented
Oh yeah.
that's not like just posts in Facebook that then you have to go search for, but because you mentioned Google Docs, something you can easily go back to, or a Google Calendar, something that you can go back to and refer. So it sounds like having things documented is helpful.
I
And then
love it. I am awful at documentation, but I love it when there is documentation because it's sort of, I mean, I think probably like everybody else, where it's like the last thing you want to do is spend 2 days writing documentation, but it does actually save you time because then you're not answering the same question 16 times. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
but
as a
yeah,
project
like
manager,
if,
that's like 90% of my job.
well, yeah,
But
like I forget if this is a question or not, but like if I was walking into my ideal design team, like they definitely have like a Google Doc that explained how everything worked, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Okay, good to know. And then the second thing that I heard you say was to sort of kind of piecemeal the information when you're onboarding somebody new so that they're not
Yeah.
overwhelmed with too much too soon.
Yeah, I think so because there's only so much stuff you can hold in your head, and then at a certain point, again, I do this badly professionally at times, but it's like if you understand something, the instinct is to just brain dump the whole thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that the people who are, I mean, I guess I'll say this is less from my design team experience and more from my intern mentoring experience. Is like you're way better off to basically say, I'm going to tell you about one thing. And, I think when you do that too, you often can sort of mitigate the question load you get from new people because it's sort of like,
Mhm.
if you're going to talk about that thing next week, it's sort of like, well, I don't need to, you can sort of more effectively table questions.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good point. I think that's good from both sides then, uh to have a rationale to approach it that way in terms of um just handing over all the information and then letting people consume it um when they want. So so that's interesting because the two almost they sort of go hand in hand, but then they also don't because so for example, if you have like here's all the things that you need to do and it's documented in one place, so it's easy to find later. But if that's too much information for somebody to take in at a time, how do you resolve that in terms of like I think that's a challenge also just in the sense that um everybody's coming from different, I guess, amounts of experience on design teams. And so different people might need different pacing in terms of how quickly they can take on information.
I
And
agree.
so, I guess that's always the sort of a question for me because I don't always know when somebody joins a team how much they know already.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's an angle that, again, like I haven't experienced in the crafty world, but have professionally, which is like at a certain point, like how much time do you want to invest in onboarding becomes a question where it's sort of like maybe if somebody's really new, it's not so much that you're onboarding them on everything, but you talk about one thing and then you have sort of like other resources they can link off to if they like are really starting at square one. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry to like be very on a tangent. Like mentoring is something I find like super interesting. So,
Well, no, I like that because that's sort of it's sort of the motivation that I had for forming DT 101 because I wanted it to be a landing place for well, we haven't evolved the group to this point yet, but the hope was to make ourselves a resource to design team managers and owners out there who have maybe more new members who haven't ever been on a team before and to kind of throw them over to us to get their questions asked if that's something that or to look for questions because to your point we've had a lot of very great discussions with a lot of different viewpoints on several topics now and Danny and I put out a series of sort of our top 5 tips for, different topics. And so we envision DT 101 as a peer mentorship community for all things, DT, less about, how to make your project, but more about all the other things that go with that, that maybe you're not necessarily, because I think, I'll be honest, as a DT manager, I almost expect most people to know how to do all the things, which
Yeah.
maybe is not good of me to expect that.
Well,
So
I mean,
you're
in theory, like DT 101 could handle that in the sense of like, well, maybe you have I don't know, a series or a content lane that's sort of like, okay, here's how you use like Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
I think the hard part, not for me, but others have expressed is sort of like, well, a lot of the good education that exists is not in any way really tailored towards like DTs and craft stuff. So I don't know. I think it would
yeah.
be an interesting niche.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely something that I feel like it could be very useful. And so we definitely, well, I'll just speak for myself. Like, I definitely envision DT 101 being a resource to anyone who finds themselves on a team and is wondering, you know, how to do all the things and how to, you know, get better, kind of succeed on their teams. Because I feel, just speaking from my own experience, that when I joined a team, I did not know, what all was involved with being a design team member, but I did kind of figure that the people who picked me expected me to know. So I just tried to learn as fast as I could. and and I was not comfortable enough to ask, what I thought would be very basic questions, just because I thought it would sort of reveal how new I was to the whole thing and how much I really didn't know. So
Yeah,
I
I mean, I
almost
think it's.
was
Oh, sorry.
scared to ask. It's almost like, you know, um sort of what you were saying earlier, or touching on just the idea of like, am I doing this right? And then for me, there was this added layer of, well, I don't want to ask if I'm doing it right, because what if they were expecting, like, what if they have like buyer's remorse in picking me because because they were expecting I would know how to do all the things, and yet I don't. So it's kind of
Yeah, I mean, I
why,
guess
like,
that's something that like DT managers can do too, which is to sort of set that expectation. I know that like when I've been mentoring professionally, like I'm much more the person who's like, ask me 5 million questions. Like if I think it's not super helpful, like I'll tell you that like talking about this isn't a good use of our time right now, but like, if you're asking me questions, you're engaged. And I'd much rather have someone be engaged than not be engaged.
yeah, yeah.
Because
Welcome.
like as the mentor, you're going to do 500 times more work if someone's just sort of like not engaged and not asking you questions.
Yeah, that's true. Because you don't know what it is that's going to be helpful, without that feedback. Amanda's in the chat. Welcome, Amanda. She says,
Hi, Amanda.
"Hello, happy Monday." Meg says, "Oh wait, I skipped." T says, "I sure would have loved not having to train myself, how to make and edit YouTubes, with just my iPhone and iPad." Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff, it would be nice, to have had more kind of instructional help for some things. Um, Danny's so funny. Danny says, "I'm just along for the ride, but seriously, I wanna help because I," she's referring to DT 101, "because I wish this had been around, years ago when I needed my questions answered." Absolutely. And that's exactly why I had, the idea to start something like DT 101. I just didn't have the courage to do it solo. And when Danny said she wished she could mentor, I was like, well, I really need somebody to help me and to mentor, because I haven't had, the experience that Danny has had in the industry. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, where when I first started in on DTs, I was very much alone because I didn't know any other crafters. And so I wish there was a DT 101 when I first started too. So it's sort of why I started it, to so that anyone else kind of in that boat, hopefully they find us. And if you know folks in that boat, share the group. It is a private group, so it's very, I think in that way, very, and I'm not eager for it to blow up in membership. I wanted to keep it a very safe environment, because we need to approach everything there with kindness and with open minds, um because we are all there in the spirit, or should all be there in the spirit of just exchanging ideas, and taking from it what works for us, but feeling free to disagree. And that's just part of being an adult, and being part of conversations that can be difficult, to either hear or say, right? When people are kind of giving you advice or whatever, for some people that's harder to do, and for some people that's hard to take. But we're all there, hopefully, with the spirit of helping each other, and so it should hopefully be taken in the right light that it's meant. um Oh, so let's see. Amanda says one of the teams I'm on has tons of documentation available for us: how to post, what to post in the blogs, where they'd like to post on social platforms, photo tips, etc.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, that's pretty cool. It is nice to be given, um, to your point, because I think you said this too, Jay, like just to know what's being expected of you, and to be more concrete about it. Um, so that's pretty cool. Oh, Angela says, well, perhaps a video series for beginners on all the tech stuff required for YouTube and IG would be helpful. It took me quite a while to figure out. Yeah, I am it's actually something I'm planning to do. So stay tuned, but don't hold your breath, because while it will happen, it may take a while to come to fruition. But I agree that there's the challenge with this, though, is that with putting any sort of technical tutorial out there, platforms change so fast. So I could tell you like where a button is and where you need to click, and then 2 months later that button no longer exists, or things are done differently. So I
I
think
think
that's
that's true, but I do think there's room for like I feel like especially in sort of the graphic design video editing space, there's a lot of perhaps not stated expectations about like what a professional thing would look like that like tend to stay pretty consistent.
I agree that there's gonna be some overarching like generalities that would be helpful. And so I think there's going to be great, you know I guess I would say like evergreen kind of content for that. But in terms of just speaking from my own experience of like questions that I'm asked, like how to just say for example, how to watermark a photo, I can speak to the generalities of what you can do, but that's not always what people are looking for. They're actually looking for the specifics of,
Yeah, and
how
that
how do
stuff
I
gets
actually do
outdated
this?
super fast.
Yeah. So like to answer that for members of my team that have struggled, I will take screenshots of Canva and like circle the buttons and number what you click on first, second, and third. And so that sort of stuff is just because of the nature of technology is ever changing. And so it's hard because, to your point, Jay, there are so many people doing tutorials and stuff like that out there. They're just not always geared towards crafting.
Hmm.
And it's not always obvious how do you translate what they're doing to what you need to do. And so that's the sort of thing that, like, I think is I definitely see a need for it, and I'm trying to figure out how to address that need, but in a way that, like, isn't obsolete, 2 months later.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's interesting that for you, the thing that has been the most helpful is just going right back to, Danny's core is communication. So
Yep.
the better the management can communicate to you expectations, requirements, and I'm hearing a little bit of, the better organized they are too, just in terms of how they're presenting that information, and how much of it they're presenting is has been of good use for your new experiences. Does that sound about
Yeah,
right?
all that stuff has been super helpful. And I mean, I think the to plagiarize one of my favorite mentors, not in the crafty world, like everybody is consuming information differently. And like there are going to be people you can say like you just need to go and like learn how to use Canva and then I'll send you all the templates and they'll just go and do it. And there are people who are going to need a lot more handholding and like that's totally fine, but like I think the hard thing virtually is like how do you understand if you're sort of info dumping too much on people? Like I
I
think it's so much easier in real life.
Well, I struggle with that too, because so I'm curious your feedback on this, because I tend to be the kind of manager who likes to have all of the information ready, like, super early. And when but what I'm noticing, and would love your feedback on this, Jay, is that some people, um they want the information when they're ready for the information, and not everybody works that early. And
I
so,
think
like,
that's
let's
true.
say yeah,
So
so
like personally, I would rather have all the information early, and then
Uh-huh.
I can read through it. And if I needed clarification, I could ask a more targeted question. Um, but I think you're not wrong. I mean, there are some people who are busy or like things just fall off people's radar sometimes. So like if you're telling somebody a very specific thing you need them to do in 2 months, like
Yeah,
there's people who are just going to have a hard time with like remembering that that's an important thing they need to do.
right.
So I
And
mean, it's super unhelpful, but it's basically like it depends a lot on the person.
yeah, that's what I struggle with, is that, like, I manage teams the way I want teams run, which I think
Hmm.
is probably very like, duh. Um But what that ultimately means is that, the way I operate isn't the way everybody else operates. And so, you know, if I'm communicating something, a month or two in advance, and somebody else is like, "Well, I'm not even thinking that far ahead yet, so ignore." And then that just means more questions for me down the pipe, because maybe it's been communicated too early, and they've forgotten even that it was already, shared. All of the information they needed was already shared. And then come the questions of, what are we doing here? So, uh, so I
Yeah,
always
I mean,
struggle with
I still think you're better off sharing it early, and then if people are like, you know, I mean, you could do a very basic reminder of like, hey, this thing's coming up in 2 weeks, and like, here's a link to the thing that explains it.
that. Okay.
Um, I don't know if I've experienced that in the crafty world, but I've had some project managers in the business world who are very good at sort of like they put the information out early, but then they tend to do. I mean, and people kind of, and I feel like they tend to judge it based on like the people involved, but like there's more of a. I think there's sort of a reminders that go out closer to the
Mhm.
actual day the thing needs to happen, and then I think some people just sort of like flush the information because hey, I have these 10 projects in front of me right now, and I can't really think about this one. So
Right.
I don't know if there's like a perfect solution, but I found that like getting the information out and then people who will like remind you every so often that can be kind of helpful.
Okay. That's good to know. I'll definitely try to incorporate more of that because I'm definitely on the side of I'm gonna give you the information as soon as I know it and it's concrete, and that way when you're ready for it, hopefully it's already there. But I can see how like reminders might be helpful for somebody who wasn't ready to hear that information at the time, and then hopefully one of the reminders will catch them when they are ready to focus on it. So so thanks for that. That's a good suggestion. Um, is there anything else that you feel like, DT managers could do better or could do, differently to help somebody who is new on their team?
Um, I think actually having scheduled things the team does is helpful. Like I've definitely liked when I was new, like, if the team does a monthly hop or the team does a monthly YouTube thing or something, like I think having, and I guess this is more a comment on like influencer teams as opposed to design teams, but it's sort of like if you are doing more of a sort of an internship thing or like a more entry level role, like having something you can plug into is very helpful.
Okay. Like, just having like a cadence of
Yeah, I think so. And because
yeah.
I think like sometimes if you're only required to do a project every couple months, it's like, well, I don't know when I should do that or what materials I should use. So, I mean, I think sometimes
Mhm.
having something that's a little more bounded can be helpful as a new person where it's like, I don't know, you know, we're doing this project and like, we're all working around this theme. So we're really looking for a project with this theme. I think some
Right.
of that stuff can be very helpful. I mean, similar to the way like craft roulette and other challenges like that are helpful in that, like, well, rather than having a blank canvas, you're at least sort of given some framework to work within.
Yeah, that's a good point because I do, and also for the reasons that you stated, it's just nice to have some ideas to get started with and a
Yeah,
direction to go with your crafting. But from the perspective of influencer teams being and I think you made this point earlier as well, being a little bit of an insight into what design teams would be like, um, because there's a little bit of that idea of, well, you have a brief, that you need to design to, whether it's specific products that you need to work with or a theme that everybody's crafting to, and so, on a influencer team that might be a little bit, more casual, having a little bit of that does give you a little bit of a taste of what being on a design team is like. Um, how did you enjoy like do you how would you recommend, because you mentioned also that you've been on design teams as a guest. Um, how would you compare your guest DT experience to your influencer team experience and to your design team experience?
Hmm. Um, I think a guest DT spot is a really good place to be if you want to get to kind of understand how a team functions. So I think it's like you're going to have a similar requirement base to like being on a design team generally. Um, but you don't have the 3 month 3, 6, or 12-month commitment. So
Mhm.
like if so you can decide if like that's a group of folks you really want to work with or not. And I mean, kind of like the influencer teams, it probably sets you up a lot better because people know your work at that point, and you can express interest in being on the design team permanently if you want to, and probably have maybe not success, but you'll know that the people are familiar with your work to know when, like, if a slot did open up that was sort of in your niche, that like you'd be a person they could call.
Yeah.
Um, so I think if you want to really get to know the design team, guest DTing is definitely an awesome option. Um, I think sort of the
Did you
unfortunate. Oh, sorry.
Oh, can I just ask a quick follow-up on that?
Oh,
Did you
sure.
feel plugged into the team? Because I've guest DT'd, but when I've done that, I had no clue who else was on the team. Like, I didn't
I
actually
didn't feel
meet
that
the
plugged
team, so to
into the
speak.
team. Yeah, I agree. Like you don't really meet the team exactly, but like when the hop or whatever happens, like you get to see who's on the team. I mean, I
True.
think you more get to meet the, I'll say, leadership of the team more than anything else. Like you can understand how they run
Oh,
their
yeah.
team.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
Um,
What were you
oh
gonna say?
no, no, I was just gonna say that like I think the guest DT spots are probably the hardest thing to find because you don't really see like design team calls for a guest DT person.
Yeah, that's true.
Like occasionally there are sort of like I have seen that there have been sort of competitions or challenges or whatever you want to call them that sort
Yeah.
of like if you win you get to guest DT. So like those might be a good option if that's definitely kind of the route you want to go.
Mhm.
Um, I'll say the time I guest DT'd, I was just asked by the I'll say by like the team leadership to basically like, hey, would you like to do this?
Yeah.
Um, which is very surprising at the time. But anyway, um, so I think that's sort of the pros and cons of that. I think there are really no downsides to like guest DTing, honestly, because you get sort of a short commitment, but also the ability to sort of like feel out how the team would run and kind of have a better platform to make a decision if they do have a call, so that you can say like, well, would I want to do that or not?
Right. Kind of a try before you buy sort of situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
I
interesting.
think influencer teams are kind of a similar thing in that most of them don't have a specified term. At least the ones I've been familiar with, it's sort of like, let us know if you don't want to be on the team anymore, kind of a thing, as opposed to um, like design teams. I think almost exclusively have a, you know, every so often we're going to do a design team call kind of idea.
Right.
Um, So I don't know. I think for a lot of people, especially if you're getting into this more as a hobbyist, I think the influencer teams are an awesome option. I've been very happy with the influencer teams I've been on, and I think that like the flexibility is just not something you're going to find in any other role, really,
Yeah.
other than being a fan, which is not mentioned here, but that's also an option, right? Like you can, most companies have a fan group, and you can just be active in their fan group, and you won't get any compensation. But if you want a venue to engage in the brand, that's another option you might have. Um, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's a really good point that doesn't get brought up enough, I think, because I feel like the just depending on, what your goals are as a designer, design team being on a design team isn't necessarily for everybody. And welcome Don, the crafty visage is here. Welcome, my friend.
Hello.
And so I don't think, because we focus so much about, how do you get on a team and what's it like being on a team, we it doesn't get mentioned enough. So I'm glad that you said it, that it's okay not to want to be on a design team either, because that there's so many reasons not to be on one. There are lots of reasons to be on one, and it all just depends on what you want to get out of the experience and what and how you want to spend your time. Because if you are interested in spending at least some of your time doing all the extra stuff that comes along with the with the role, you kind of have to know. I mean, all teams are different, but every team does have at least that, which is all the social mediaing, that comes with being on a DT and, having to photograph, and well-lit projects and watermark them and share them to the socials and all of that good stuff, and if you don't want all of that, I'm glad that you mentioned that being just part of the community is equally, rewarding or can be, and, that's a great option too.
Yeah, and
So
I mean, I think this came up in Design Teams Part 3, or Let's Talk Design Teams Part 3, but like, be assured that the design team managers and owners are like watching those fan groups a lot. So like, if they see somebody posting there a lot, they will be aware of your work.
yeah, and I think that is something that could, if you are interested in getting a guest design team spot, to your point, I also don't think I've ever really seen, them advertised, as such, like,
Nope.
apply to be a guest, I don't think I've ever seen that specifically. I've seen what you've described in terms of challenges that you could maybe win a guest, DT spot, but if you wanna break through and you wanna see how to kind of get a little bit of that experience, being an active member of those communities is a great way to do that, and so, like you said, company owners, DT leads, and whatnot, they're gonna be in those community groups, and they're gonna be engaging with their fans, and so if you're a fan and you're looking for those opportunities, that's a great way to engage. So
Yeah, and I mean,
that
if you're more on the like, I want to elevate my platform and just, I just want to, like, if you're more on the networking friendship side of the equation, like, they're a good zero commitment way to get involved too.
right. That's a good point because, I think this was one of the first things you said just in terms of, keeping your crafting a hobby so that, you have the time to do the things to do all the other projects that you want to be doing and not be spending 100% of your crafty time doing design team projects. So, so that's a good point, that you bring up as well. And so that's a good sort of segue to our last question. And then if there are more questions in the live chat, please do get them in the chat, and that way we can get them in front of Jay. But Jay, what would be your number one advice for anybody who is thinking about joining a design team?
I guess I
Thoughts?
have two answers to this, which probably is not reinterpreting the question a little too much, but I guess I think I've touched on both of these things before. So I think if you're thinking about joining a design team, I think figuring out what kind of a design team would work best for you is helpful. Or if, are you definitely looking for the free product? Are you okay with like not having the free product? Would you be happier just in a fan community? I mean, I think these are things, depending on your goals, that are worth thinking through ahead of time. Because like if you get on a design team and accept that, like I mean, it's essentially a job. So you're going to be expected to be professional and, deliver work on time. So, I mean, I think being clear about your goals is very helpful. I don't think I personally would have done things differently, but I definitely wasn't clear about my goals. And I feel like that would have been a good thing to think through before just sort of saying, oh, well, this seems like the thing people suggest, so let's just do that. So that's sort of my not really answering the question piece of advice. I think if you definitely want to get on a design team, and I'll plug DT 101 again because there's a whole thread on this, but um, figuring out how to make your photos look good is really important because other than you, like most of the people aren't going to see these projects in real life. So like how they're
Oh,
staged and how they're presented is really important. And that's
yeah.
just not a design team thing, but like, for example, like artists of any kind, right? Like this may be the only way people are going to see things. So
Yeah.
it's really important that it represents who you are well. So I guess that
That's
would be my, if you definitely want, know that you, I mean, if you want to have your work out there, I mean, I think that uh, I wouldn't spend a lot of money initially if you don't know if you want to be a crafter on the internet, but there's some very low cost ways that you can basically up how nice your photos look.
Yeah, and phones are fabulous cameras these days, so you
Yeah,
definitely do not need to go out and get, like, a DSLR to to
yeah.
photograph your projects, so, um, I think both points that you bring up are really good, that, maybe, think about what your motivation is for and what you're hoping to get out of, being on a design team, and from there, that might actually help guide what kind of so when you say what kind of team, you're talking, like, do you wanna do a guest spot or a influencer kind of, spot versus a full-time design team spot, or did you mean something else in terms of
No,
what
I meant
type
that
of team?
primarily just because, like, I feel like, well, I'm pretty new, but I guess I'll say, like, historically, I think there were sort of just design teams, but it seems like there are a lot of more lanes you could potentially be in, depending on your goals and, as you say, what you hope to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that the influencer type of teams, um, I feel like those are still rare opportunities because I only know 2. Do you know more than the 2?
I don't. I hope they become a thing because I think they're a great on ramp for people, or just a great place for people to sit who are basically, super fans of a given brand
Yeah.
and want to do projects occasionally and connect with other people who really like stuff.
And I think that that's a really great point that you bring up because I feel like they are, I think they're exactly that in terms of, like, they're super fans, and it's a way that the company, if it's, a product company, can, recognize their super fans who are already sharing a lot, right? And so you're just giving them, some perks, for that because while they may not be getting the free product that the design team is getting, hopefully they're getting other perks that make it worthwhile. And as well, they're already kind of, sharing using your products, and so why not, like, formalize that a little bit, give them a nice badge, and put a little bit of organization around their efforts to build that community and to maybe direct some of what you're hoping to get in by way of marketing. Because and I think that you said this, very early on, you're kind of a marketing arm for for the company or for, the design team owner. And so they're hoping to get something out of your contribution, and marketing is mostly that, right? So
Yeah, and I,
I
I mean, I think the other thing that we've seen in the last couple of months too is both Meta and YouTube have sort of retooled all their monetization to very much cater to people who have super fans. Or, I
Mhm.
don't mean that in like not in like a creepy stan kind of way, but more in like I have a highly engaged audience and they're going to show up for stuff. So I mean, I think that you see it happening in sort of the broader social media landscape as well.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. That's a really good point, and I agree with you. I hope more of those opportunities do open up, and I'm glad that at least the two that I know of exist and that I can be a part of that, but and that you've had that experience and so far that you're liking it. So awesome. Well, that was the last question that I had planned. And so if we don't have any more questions in the chat, I will go back to this one question that was asked earlier. So this is from Cynthia. She says, "Do you think AI will affect the crafting world?" Thoughts, Jay?
I don't know. I think I feel like the thing that won't affect it is that I feel like people have a very strong connection to the handmade element of a lot of these cards. Like, I think when you go, if you look at more of the side of the crafting world that's like doing more digital creations and is more like, I guess I'll say, like, I've seen some really interesting things people have done, like in Procreate, for example, where, essentially when you're done, it's a flat card you can print out, but there's a lot of design work that went into it. I feel like that would be very open to like leveraging AI art to do like to sort of do some of the figuring out there, but I'm not sure if the more handmade side of the crafting industry will see too much, but who knows?
Because, like, so do you ever can you envision a world where maybe a design team just needs people to create or maybe color certain stamped images or whatever, and then a design team manager's role then becomes just give AI prompts to generate cards.
You probably could.
And then
I
you know
I
what?
never thought of that, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
I don't see why you couldn't. And I mean, and I've seen recently, like, some sort of traditional stamp companies too have sort of, I don't know if they've done it for their design team or just for their own personal use, but like, even if they're not selling a digital stamp, right, they'll sort of digitally color the line art and then print that
Mhm.
out and then use that as sort of a time saving technique. So, I mean, if
Yeah,
you could, I feel like if you could create sort of, I don't know what you want to call them, the assets, right? Then you could
yeah.
definitely feed that into some model to basically say like, I could make a bunch of art and have a bunch of like Halloween themed assets and like say, make me a Halloween card that has cats and candy on it or whatnot,
Right,
right? So I
right.
mean, potentially you could do that and come up with an almost limited amount of content that way.
And I mean, I'm Cynthia, I would never have thought of this, but since you asked it, I didn't wanna bring it up on screen earlier just because it was a little bit off topic, but it's fascinating to think about what the possibilities are because, you asked this early enough ago or long enough ago that I've had a chance to noodle on it a little bit, but the idea that, like, maybe design teams, you don't need, 10, 15 people anymore, maybe you just need 5 people, and you can just mash up what you need. And I could see from a business point of view, if you really needed to kinda sell XYZ stamp set or die set, that's one of the prompts. Make me a card using stamp set XYZ that's Halloween themed, that's grungy, that's, feed it all the parameters and then like see what it makes. And that then makes DT roles, which are already few and far between as it is, even more scarce. So to your point, I think it's going to take a lot of I don't think you can ever 100% replace somebody's handcrafted work, and the art, the passion, the vision that went into making it. But I wonder if for some companies, it's more AI can be a more like effective way to generate if what they're looking for is just marketing assets, generate more ideas faster and more targeted to exactly what they want or need to push at that time in terms of, fulfilling or just trying to like move their inventory, move their stock. So, um, it is interesting. And especially since AI is just gonna continue to get better. So, like, I don't know if you've seen, any good, I forget the name of it, but there's an AI engine that already does, like, give it some prompts and it'll create, like, YouTube thumbnails for you, for your videos.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, and I know that I think what I saw I think what I saw Cynthia, post not too long after this one is that, ChatGPT could potentially, like, write your blog post for you. Like
Well, and I think we've seen those products on the market already from companies, right? Like essentially, give me a photo and a couple words, and like we'll generate essentially copy for you.
oh, really? Is that already happening?
Yeah, I saw it as I forget if this was an advertisement or you know, I think it
Interesting.
was a thing I actually got marketed to that was basically like, AI assisted blogging basically.
Really? Yeah, that's fascinating. Maybe I should look into that because 'cause I'm not big on blogging, but if an AI could do it for me, like, because that's the other twist on it. Because maybe AI could help us as DT members carry some weight, like, carry some of the burden that we have to bear in our DT work that's beyond the actual crafting of the thing. Like, if AI could, like, write me a good Instagram post or write me a good blog post, that sure would save me a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it could. Well, I don't know. That would be kind of interesting. I mean, I think it, like in, I've just seen such a rise in, services that want to sell you a product that's basically like, let us do all the pick your favorite social media platform research for you, and like, we'll just tell you what you should, we'll just basically send you prompts that say like, you should do
Yeah.
a video about this because it's a sweet spot in the, in the search engine that has to do with the content, that's like at least adjacent to the lane that you're in.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Interest
I don't think it would be all that hard to basically get to the point of saying, like, especially for something like, I mean, I don't think it would be hard to get to the point of, like, essentially getting a prompt and then having AI, like, figure out how to, like, push that thing to Instagram for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Very fascinating. Thanks for that question, Cynthia, because I would never have thought about AI and its impact on our crafting community, but I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes, where that leads us. So, thanks so much, Jay, for spending this time with us and giving me this opportunity to kind of pick your brain and giving us all a little bit more insight into you as a person, as a crafter, and your journey, both as a crafter and as a design team member. I've learned so much from you and about you, and it's been an absolute pleasure to spend the last couple hours chatting with you. We can probably go on, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk about anything that maybe I didn't ask that you want to share, and then also maybe talk a little bit about anything new that's coming up that you want to maybe share, promote, or give a shout out to, or any sneaks into upcoming videos that we can look forward to. Just want to give you some time to just talk about whatever you'd like to talk about before we close out the stream.
Yeah, I think one thing I touched on that I think I'll sort of answer directly is sort of like what would my ideal design team look like? I think we covered most of the stuff already, because like I really think it. I mean, it's funny. I didn't mention this, but you did. But it's actually in my notes, which says good documentation. So I mean, I think that um, you know, really like having a clear focus and having good information available would be super awesome. I mean, I think that's what I really look at in look for in design teams and people to work with because it just matches my style really well. Let me see. I'm doing a bunch of reels that were related to my Christmas in July Kendra's Card Challenge 11, which are going to start coming out probably this week. So that's going to be fun. I've been doing a lot of Christmas in July stuff,
Yay.
and there's it hasn't been announced yet, but in Lynn's other group, there's going to be a fun thing in August. So stay tuned for that once we get to August. And
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. I don't know. I've also been doing, it's funny, I've made a couple new friends recently who are into art and coloring, but aren't that into card making. So, like, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I've also been doing some sort of live streams on Sunday sometime around early afternoon to just sort of like talk through sort of a like if you were new, how would you approach this, and try and keep it a little targeted on like not having unlimited amounts of time to purchase supplies. So I don't know, all
Yeah.
that stuff I'm really looking forward to.
That's awesome. So I put in the chat a couple places where you can find Jay. So there's Jay on YouTube. I mean, he's Craft by Jay everywhere, but if you need direct links,
Yeah.
because on Instagram there are underscores in his handle. And so that's cool that you're live streaming. So that's Sundays every week. You think you'll do
Yeah,
that?
I think so. I was well, it's funny, like I started doing a lot of panel live streams, mostly through Crafty Fun, but I really liked panel live streams, and it was sort of this question came up on a panel live stream, and it was sort of like, I don't know, like it wasn't a good format. You know, it's sort of like when you've already been live streaming for a while, it's like, well, I don't really want to start like doing a whole hour long new project, but it kind of grew out of that. So I don't know. But yeah, I'm planning to for at least the foreseeable future. Um,
Cool.
it's been nice because I think when I kicked off my channel, I did live streams, but like there were no people. So it's
Yeah.
a little like, and which sort of led to my original video style of just sort of like filming a live stream and then not doing a lot of editing. But I mean, recently people have really liked sort of the more on task videos. So, you know, what used to be a half an hour live stream is now like a 7 or 8 minute video. So, I mean, I kind of have enjoyed pulling the live streams back in because like sometimes it's just kind of fun. I don't know how other people use live streams, but I just like to sort of have them on in the background. And if I'm crafting or doing other stuff, it's just kind of nice to sort of dip in and out.
Yeah. So Don wants to know, what time did you say on Sundays?
The next one's going to be 1 p.m. Central. I don't know if my Sunday schedule kind of ranges a bit, but I'm probably going to. I figured that, like, you know, if people are doing stuff in the morning, like, sort of Sunday afternoons is always kind of a downtime. And I know that I think Amanda with Pear Blossom Press does like a Zoom crafternoon thing later in the afternoon. So I was kind of targeting slightly earlier because sometimes that's kind of fun to dip into.
Yeah. It's so sweet of you to like be so considerate of not overlapping other people's. It's so kind of you, but definitely do the time that works best for you and your audience, and we'll find you, and we'll join, because I think that the crafty community is always so nice, and I always feel that way too in terms of like when to schedule my streams as well. That's why we're doing this on a Monday, because as far as I know, no one, no one else streams on a Monday. But I think at some point when more folks stream, it's going to be harder and harder to like avoid the
Yeah, that's
overlap.
true.
So definitely do the time that I think works best for your schedule, and we'll make the time to come watch. So thanks for I missed your first one. I caught it on replay, but definitely like we have a chat group in the Crafty Fun with Friends Facebook group, and so let us all know there when you're streaming, and that way we can pop in.
Yeah, it's funny. I did the thing that always drove me nuts about some streamers, which is like they just show up randomly, and it's kind of like this time around, I think I'm gonna at least pre-schedule them so they're at least on the calendar so people know when they are if they're like looking at my channel. But I don't know. I always like it when you can like see what's coming up. So like even if you miss the stream, right, you can at least like catch it on replay.
Yeah, and that's sort of why I think when I did my first couple of solo live streams, it was totally unannounced because I didn't mind if there weren't a lot of people there. Because I think if there were more people, I would have been more nervous. So
Well, and you never know what people have going on, especially if it's like during the week. It's sort of like,
yeah. But now we know Sundays sometime in the afternoon Central Time it will and you have your next one already scheduled, so
I
it's
do
on
because
the
I don't think I had
20th.
anything going on next weekend. So
Yeah. Exciting. Well, I can't wait to catch that. And thanks again for joining. For folks who are either live or catch us on replay, do check out Jay's channel. Meet up with us on Sunday if you can. This coming Sunday, Jay's got a live stream going, and so definitely let's all connect there and further the conversation. And for anyone who isn't already, who might be interested, I'll drop another link both to my chat and to Jay's channel here on YouTube. There's a link to Design Team 101. Thank you, Jay, for plugging it. And, and if anyone is interested in joining that group, do make sure to answer the questions and agree to the group rules, because I'm a stickler for that. And it's a way that we can protect the community and make sure that everybody at least at one point is aware of how we like to frame the discussion and keep that a safe space so that it's a nice healthy exchange of ideas, and that everybody comes into that group with the understanding that we're all there to share information in the spirit of helping each other grow and in the spirit of just learning. And I think it's a nice space for us to do that outside of, to your point, Jay, like the context of where you are needing to deliver your work, right? So you have some nice unbiased opinions, and if you are like me, where you were a little bit shy or scared to ask questions in your group, hopefully you find Design Team 101 a safe space to get those questions answered. So thanks again to Jay for being here, and thank you everybody who joined us live and contributed to the conversation, and really appreciate everybody who was able to catch live. And if you're catching this on replay and you have more questions for Jay, let him know. He'll I'm sure be watching for comments both on his stream video, which will be up once we end the stream, and as well any questions that pop up on my channel too. And if he's not, I'll definitely get those questions over to Jay so that he can help to answer. So so drop your questions in the comments and let us know your thoughts too. If not questions, let us know your thoughts and opinions and experiences. We're always happy to learn and hear different perspectives. So thanks everybody. With that, I hope everybody's rest of your Monday goes well and the rest of your week goes well. So bye everybody. Thanks again for joining.